panelists. I'm sure some of you know them, but they have such amazing backgrounds that I actually need to look at my agenda. So Charrise Hart. Charisse is the CEO at Ready for School and Ready for Life. As you know, the organization works with other partners, and they're working from prenatal through school entry. And Ready for School, Ready for Life has been around for some time through many sort of machinations. And Charisse has received the Governor's Award for Outstanding Volunteerism in Guilford County, also the Communities and Schools Volunteer of the Year. And also before she came to Guilford, she worked in Wilmington, and she was on the Business Journal's Women to Watch. She has a bachelor's degree in sociology from NC State, a master's in social work from UNC Chapel Hill, and an MBA from Wake Forest. So Danielle is the Executive Director of the Partnership for Children, and they are the backbone for the Campaign for Grade Level Reading in Durham. She's also served as the Director of Early Childhood Systems and the NC Pre-K Manager for the partnership. She has 20 years of experience, including early Head Start, and nonprofit management. She's received a master's in education at UNC Wilmington, a master's in public health from Hunter College at CUNY. And also she is pursuing a doctorate right now in curriculum instruction from UNC Wilmington. So that's amazing. Muffy is our executive director at NCECF. She joined in June of 2019. Prior to that, she was a director of development at both Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina and the Institute for Child Success in South Carolina. She's also worked on a visitor exchange program at the State Department, US State Department, and she holds a bachelor's degree in history and humanistic studies from Notre Dame, and her master's degree is in international affairs, focusing on demographics and labor migration from Georgetown University. Wow, some awesome women today, and we're really happy to have you. So we're going to move right into the questions, and you can take the slide down now, Caitlin. Aha, there we are. Terrific. All right. So as you know, there's a chat box, so continue to put questions or thoughts in there. So we're going to start with what I raised earlier was about, we know that in these collaboratives, there's really no silver bullet for prioritizing, racial equity. We heard from the folks earlier that it's a journey, it's hard work. There's maybe a step back and 2 steps forward. I like to think about it more positively than 2 steps back and 1 forward. But we'd really like to hear about 1 or 2 strategies in your collaborative or your organization that you would really identify as the moment at which you really felt there was a turning point, where the turning the page happened in terms of the embracing of this work across your organization. So I am going to start with Danielle, and then we'll go to Charisse and Muffy, just so you know when you're going to be up. So there we go.
Okay, so thank you for having me. So for Durham's Partnership, when we realized what needed to change was pretty much just a whole concept of how we did our work. Meaning, so often, and I know many others may have done this in the past, you kind of create these programs and then get buy-in and input at the end goal. So we wanted to do something really different. And the thought was from the onset, how do we get entry or access into parent spaces where parents are in a power position to invite us into those spaces, where we're not coming saying, oh, we need to get on your agenda either 30 minutes on the start or 30 minutes at the end. We really want to come alongside and really respect and honor parents and definitely culture. So our whole approach was on a culturally responsive lens. Everything was done through how can we honor, validate, respect, and just come in as humble seekers, if you will. And that's what the change was for us. We came and decided to do a listening tour And the concept was, we have our own idea and definition of what literacy means, but we want to hear from parents. What do you believe is literacy? What does literacy mean to you, to your family, to your children? How do you process literacy? How do you, gather information around literacy? So really wanting to hear the voice and narrative of parents from parents. So we designed listening tours, and we asked and we said, can we come into your space? Would you like us to come into your space? And that's how that rapport and relationship started, where we first just had conversations around, what is literacy? What does that look like to you? What does that mean to you? And we had that concept in different languages, because again, oftentimes we use our native tongue, which is English, and then translate later. So again, from the onset of having those different languages and saying what is literacy, so we would have it in different languages, and just to really present that to our community and ask, how can we come into your space? May we come into your space? Some folks didn't. I will say, no, the majority did want us in their space, but we had to learn, even again, once we started doing the work down the line. And I don't know if I'm getting ahead to the third question.
It's okay.
Okay, because even then we discovered that in our work, once we created these, spaces where families allowed us to come in, we then said, okay, here's all the information we've gleaned. How do we utilize this? And how do we do it in a way, again, that honors and respects families and their stories? So what we did was create this shared space, if you will. So there's a space for parents where they're able to come in, share their concerns, share their challenges, successes with different entities that we do partner with. So there may be some challenges, let's say, with the school system, but how do we elicit that information in an authentic way where parents feel encouraged and free to really share their concerns and challenges? So we would have that space just for parents to be feeling empowered. They're leading the conversation. We're just there to help facilitate and move it along. We then have that information into what we call the dual space. So that's where we have those institutions and different community stakeholders who are at the table, along with our parent leaders. And then our staff kind of helps to facilitate and bring the information in where parents aren't feeling threatened or feeling violated, like we misuse their trust and information. So that is how they're able to then, again, explore and discover solutions to what was brought up in their parent space. So yeah. So I would say that the listening tours is what was our pivoting moment. Okay. Having those listening tours, being invited into spaces and not demanding like, hey, I want to get on your agenda for 30 minutes, but really, asking to come in and just honor what they were already doing. And then trying to find ways to come alongside what many families were already doing. And to our surprise, we were plugged into many informal spaces where parents were gathering and coming together and really having powerful discussions. But it was done through those, again, parent listening tours, where a parent would come and say to us, hey, you need to find out about this Mocha Moms group. They meet on Mondays. Or, hey, it's a dad's group that's meeting on Thursdays. You guys really need to connect with them. And then they'll say, you know what, we'll connect for you. Just who should we tell them to call? That kind of thing, where they took it on upon themselves to really connect us in and allow us into their spaces.
That's great, Danielle. Maybe on that third question, you could give us an example, since you sort of developed that idea already. Okay. Charisse?
Wonderful. And Danielle, thank you so much for your overview. And I really, really do admire your empowerment model. I think for Ready for School, Ready for Life, we really had to take a few steps back and really emphasize the intersection between racial equity and family voice. And for a couple of reasons. One, because we know that racism plays a major role in the outcomes of our families and children. And also, we want to make sure that we're engaging parents and families along our process. Ready for School, Ready for Life, I consider ourselves to be a young startup organization or backbone organization. And we really needed to make sure that we're not just solely focused on racial equity, but we're pulling in family voice in our racial equity approach. And so about 5 years ago, we launched what we call the Guilford Parent Leader Network. And Heather Adams, who's on the call, is our Director of Engagement and Literacy Initiatives. And she does an amazing job of supporting families and empowering families in the Guilford Parent Leader Network. And we have a framework that we use to empower families to tell us what they need in our approach for early childhood systems building. But, one step further I'd like to share is that Ready for School, Ready for Life really needed to select a framework to set the tone and create consistency within the organization. So often we get so excited about our movements that we kind of put all of our energy into it, and then we kind of lose sight of the end goal. So we decided to adopt the Parent Manifesto from the Center for the Study of Social Policy. And I believe many of you on this call are members of the EC Link, or the Early Childhood Learning and Innovation Network for Communities. And so what we wanted to do is honor that Parent Manifesto, which clearly lays out 5 commitments, and it challenges the organization to first challenge racism, embrace parent leadership, prioritize resources, create career pathways, and maximize equitable outcomes. And we recognize at Ready for School, Ready for Life that there are 2 ways to approach racial equity. And what I've seen over the years, and even in the Guilford County community, that sometimes we are often reactionary in our responses to racial equity. And so what happens is we see an issue and we automatically want to roll up our sleeves and take a deep dive in addressing the issue. And what happens is that that's great, but that is short term. What is the long-term approach to racial equity and parent engagement? So what we want to do is also balance that out. It's okay to be reactionary sometimes, but we also need to design long-term strategies to be intentional. And so we've got to design a system of diversity, equity, and inclusion at all levels of the organization. And that means with our board of directors, that means with the Guilford Parent Leader Network, how we select community partners to be a part of our systems building journey, and the staff of Ready for School, Ready for Life. So again, selecting a framework to hold us accountable and to keep us on track was key. And that's just one of the key strategies that we're using at Ready for School, Ready for Life and addressing racial equity.
Thank you, Charisse. Muffy?
That was excellent. Thank you both, Danielle and Charisse, for those really incredible overviews of all the great work that you're doing in your counties and beyond. That serves as a model for the state. When I came to NCECF in 2019, it was kind of at the implementation phase of the Pathways for Grade Level Reading. But our organization began its racial equity journey through that kind of scope of work, which became a much larger body of work than we originally anticipated. We thought it was going to kind of set the scope for the organization. And instead, it became sort of the consent agenda for the state about all of the things that it takes from pre-birth to age 8 to ensure the best results for our children and the best chances in health and education to be reading at grade level. And so that's sort of where we began our journey. And we were fortunate to bring along with us a consultancy firm who I'm sure many of you know, Counterpart Consulting, Sterling Freeman and Kathleen Krabs. And they worked with us to, really do internal audits on all of the work groups that were coming together, the agendas, everything that was produced from these meetings, and then to center everyone at the beginning of these meetings in what we are here for, what racial equity means. When I came on board, our board was going through racial equity training with Counterpart Consulting. And at my first full board meeting, I remember thinking, we must be doing this right because it's really uncomfortable and we're making a lot of people mad. And so for me, I knew that that was good. We ended up having a little bit of attrition on our board. And also a staff member who was sort of growing in her capacity and in her professional development into what does it mean for our organization to really live racial equity. It's probably pretty clear to you all that I am a white woman, Lisa is a white woman, Mandia Bleidinger and Kaylin are white women. And so how do we step back and give the platform to others who are better equipped to lead? and how do we support racial equity as a culture in early childhood development in the state. And so she really kind of self-directed her role as organizational equity officer. And that means we have a standing racial equity committee on our board that she facilitates. All of our internal documents that are outward facing go through that board for them to be sure that that language is consistent with the racial equity statement that we drafted together with our board of directors. We had one for the Pathways Project, but we hadn't had one for our organization. Through our strategic plan, we now name racial equity. It wasn't initially in our vision and mission statements. In our staff and kind of our learning and growing through this process, we also have we have a curated list of materials, reading materials, books, podcasts, and we all read them together, sort of like a staff discussion group. We were finding that they were at the end of our agenda, and so at our weekly staff meetings, we weren't getting to them, and that clearly is not really leading intentionally with racial equity. So now they are at the top of our agenda. But the focus for Sumera, who was our organizational equity officer now, is to kind of ensure that we, in all that we do, and all of the folks that we contract with, and all of the people that we are recruiting to bring onto our board of directors, and all of the vendors that we select for the organization, that we are rooting that in racial equity. And so I think for me, when I understood that this was a turning point, was when people were uncomfortable, and that we continue to lean into that discomfort, because pain is growth. And I think that is where we are, and it is bled into some of the initiatives that we now are helping to facilitate across the state. And I can talk about that a little bit more as we continue, but our role at the foundation is really to provide convening and facilitation support, communication support, and policy analysis. And so we see ourselves as a bridge across the state, across many communities, as it relates to early childhood systems. And so racial equity is at the forefront, key, and family voice to how we go about being a bridge. And so we can dig into some of those initiatives, I think, through the next questions.
That's great, Muffy. And I'll just add that internal audit was so important to us to realize some of the things that we were doing that in some ways put us in the good old girls network, which we always talk about how we don't want to, we're fighting the good old boys network. So I appreciated that as a big part of our work. So next question, and this time we'll start with Charisse, and then Muffy, and then Danielle. Tell us a little bit about, from what you just said, what was a takeaway for you, and more importantly, where has it taken you? And you can be specific or give an example, but where has it taken you?
Sure. So when Ready for School, Ready for Life started this work about 7 years ago, the organization conducted a great deal of focus groups with various members of the community, including elected officials, business leaders, community partners, human services organization, and families. But one key factor to note is that when Ready for Schools, Ready for Life started this work 6 to 7 years ago, there's a lot that has changed. And, from politics, technology, and also best practices for community engagement. And, a lesson learned for us is that we often place so much energy into our outreach efforts, and then we become so proud of the work that we've done. We're so proud of the design and everything that we've created. But the work doesn't stop there. What we led 7 years ago is really obsolete. And so we now understand that when we participate in some sort of initiative or focus group or community outreach, and once that time with our community has concluded, we have to begin preparations for the next movement. And so that has been a lesson learned for us in order to not just stay relevant as a backbone organization, but to make sure that we are supporting the families that we're serving. Families that we served 7 years ago, they had a child that was born 7 years ago, they're now 7 years old. And so what was needed then is now no longer needed, and we have to make sure that we stay relevant. Most recently, in about August of 2020, we underwent a fairly extensive process to shift how we leverage our values and principles. Every organization has mission and they have values, but previously our values and principles were solely focused on the organization. And we now realize as a backbone organization, our values and principles need to be more reflective of our current community dynamics. And Ready for School, Ready for Life, we need to empower our community partners to adopt them and implement them. So in August, we engaged parent leaders, in addition to business leaders and several community partners, in a new process. And as a result, we now have 6 values and 17 principles. That's a lot, but we know each of them are important. And we also wanted to elevate some of our key principles and values, which include engaging the family voice, the focus on inclusivity and racial equity. And, we don't believe that our values and principles are something that will be printed off and then placed on a shelf to collect dust. So as a result, we have involved UNC Chapel Hill and the National Implementation Research Network to provide technical assistance in this work. And so what they do is they sit in and observe our meetings, our conversations, and they track how well we are implementing our values and principles. Are we staying true to our promise to the community? Are we continuing to uphold and elevate the family voice? And if we don't, it's UNC Chapel Hill's responsibility to work with us, to call us out, to hold us accountable to our community promise. And so as a result, we have learned a lot. We learned that we're doing some things well. We learned that we have some opportunities for growth. But what I'm most proud of is how our staff and our board members have responded to receiving that feedback, and also including our community partners on that process. So I would say those were some key takeaways, and I just look forward to the months ahead to see what else we can learn from our movement.
Fantastic. Danielle? Oops, did I do that wrong? Shoot.
I think so. I think I was last, but Muffy was supposed to be next, but it's okay. Muffy, do you want me to dance now or should I dance later? Okay, so just to kind of touch a couple of elements that Charisse also mentioned was the relevancy, even as small as last year, when the pandemic first hit, how we were doing business face to face and how we're having to do it now virtually caused us to have to restructure and re-strategize. We continue to look at our CSAP values as well as our parent leadership values and ensuring that we're finding ways for them to align. We're also now in the process of, again, redesigning what will we look like for 2021. What are the current needs right now? We're trying to understand that intersectionality of literacy and day-to-day needs, because how can I really focus on literacy if my child is hungry, if my child is in need of other additional daily resources? So finding ways that we can intersect with that of connecting resources to daily instant needs, along with our focus of literacy. So just looking at how can we do that and still honor parent leadership. We are dedicated to that parent leadership space and ensuring that our parents are creating systems where we're able to pass the baton. Because again, the mom who started with us maybe 4 years ago, her child is now entering a different stage of life. She may now have different obligations, but how we create like a succession plan for the next parent leadership group to come in and take up the mantle for where our parents have left off, and that firm foundation that they've created and established with leadership and parent advocacy. So that's what we're focusing on at this moment now.
That's great. And so I'm assuming that as you're able to support parents and families with these other resources that get them to reading
Exactly
efficiently, that you're also building trust with those families, and that really helps propel your work with them.
Correct. And showing them also, again, not so much showing, I like to use that term, but connecting them to resources that they may have not have known about, but we're right there in their backyard. So again, helping them establish and create relationships. We're really big on helping families establish relationships with the different entities that they need to interface with. And how do you do that? Through empowerment. encouraging parents to really articulate what is it that you need. We have a joking saying that we use in the office: a closed mouth doesn't get fed. You must speak and tell us what it is that you need. And you have the right to stand in your truth and say, today I need Pampers.
Lydia, that's awesome. Muffy, you're on.
That's a really hard one to follow because that was so perfectly put. So coming out of our shop, all of our budgets include racial equity and family engagement now consultancy, recognizing that. So through some of our initiatives, we're on this process, we're learning, we're growing, we're trying to resist urgency, which we all know is a real white dominant norm, that this work needs to be, like Danielle and Charisse have both said so well, it comes from a place of trust, and trust doesn't happen overnight. It needs to be intentional. And when you're looking at this at the state level, how do you form relationships with folks who have already earned that trust in communities? And so I think that our state's pretty fortunate and a pretty forward thinking, or it's evolving into a forward thinking funding community now who's recognizing this as well and is freeing up more resource for local community groups and groups led by people of color to really to be empowered, to be leaders, not only in their communities, but also for us at the state to step back and allow those folks to come in. And so one of the statewide projects for which NCECF is providing really meeting facilitation and policy analysis support is called Early Well, and it's the young child, infant, and toddler mental health work. And that was really critical to understanding what do families need. And there's so many different domains. There's 12 different domains of this. So it's Part B, Part C, family child care, or child medical homes, and on and on and on and on. And getting that parent voice report done, it was really remarkable to see why parents feel uncomfortable speaking out, and how they felt safe to speak out because the folks for which we contracted to reach out to them were trusted hubs in their community. So we learned a lot from that, and there was some cross-pollination into the work that we are envisioning now around the early care education system in our state, which was fragile before the pandemic, and now we really have an opportunity, through the significant disruption, to think about what does it really mean to be equitable, and what does it really mean to be high quality, and what does it really mean to be universally accessible. And perhaps the people who have been the loudest voices in that historically, and who have done so much to create such a great system, that is revered across the United States. But again, those kids have graduated, and we are in a new space, and we need to think about how to shore up those systems and how to make them more accessible. And so that's a really important, that's a key piece, is to connect with folks like the Domestic Workers Alliance and the Black Child Development Institute in Charlotte and the Educational Equity Institute in Charlotte, that's talking about, suspension and expulsion in preschool programs. Giovannia Lewis, who is incredible. She runs EPIC in Durham County, and she's also contracted for the Early Well work. And there's so many others, but just having those widening the aperture to realize the state's a lot bigger than the same old group of advocates that have always been there. And there's some brilliance coming out of these groups. And it's time to step back and facilitate that in what they need, but to not suffocate that.
I was taking some notes. Thank you. So for the last question, I'm going to focus on Danielle and Charisse, because this parent empowerment is such an important part of where communities really want to go with their work. they're also looking at, the where. So where do you engage folks? And informal learning spaces also important part of their work. Many are already doing it. Some want to look at how they might do it. So I think it would be great to have just a very concrete example in your parent work about, like, where did it happen? Exactly how did it happen? People love stories. So at this point, a story, we got theory, we understand, starting to understand how it can work, but maybe just a little bit of a story about how it is working. And so we'll go with Danielle, and then Charisse could close us out.
Okay, so the one story that really stands in mind, and I'm not sure if my director of programs is still on, Brittany Gregory. Well, Brittany and I presented, it was at the
She is.
Okay, so Brittany, help me out, put in the chat box. I can't remember the name of the PTA organization, so don't shoot me, please. But it was like the National PTA group. Again, I'm lost with the name right now, but we presented there to do our first, large gathering of the parent listening tour. And we learned more on the, what we call like the parking lot offline conversations after the presentation, when we had so many parents coming up to us saying, okay, I said this on my survey. However, here's what I really feel. Here's what I really think. I wrote this on my whiteboard, on the white noteboard, but here's my really thoughts. And can you call me? I mean, they were just bombarding us, giving us so much information to follow up and connect and really create those relationships that I was surprised. It was almost as though they were just waiting to tell their story. And they wanted the opportunity with people who were being authentic. I'm a native New Yorker. What you see is what you get. I don't have time for the false pretense. I can't create this facade or this other image or a shifting face. That's not who I am. Very authentic, very animated. And I really felt as we really connected with them on that level, that authenticity, where they felt like these ladies aren't here trying to sell us something. They really want to learn and hear from us. They appreciate our voice. They're respecting our voice. And I think we really conveyed that to that group. And that was like our trajectory. From there on, we were getting invites just to come and talk. And we would just do that. We would have open conversation. Of course, you bring food. I was always raised, you never go to someone's house without a cake or some flowers. You bring something. So I brought that with me, that same concept of we're going into their home. They're not so much their home, but their meeting space, which is also equivalent to like their home. So you come with an offering, you come with something. You don't come empty-handed, just asking to glean and take information. But here, can I offer you a meal? What is your favorite dessert? And we would bring just that to the next one, their favorite desserts. We would bring lunch and just have conversation, have dialogue, and create those relationships. And from there, it was just amazing, the feedback and responses and the continued invitations. After a while, we didn't have to go around asking, can we come into your space? They were calling us saying, we're having this. Would you guys be interested in coming? Almost to the point where I felt I had to owe Brittany a couple of coffees for those Saturday and Sunday sessions, because it was, again, those informal hours. It wasn't always a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. It would be a Saturday at 5 or a Sunday at 2 after a person's church or worship service. So again, just honoring that culture, those relationships is really key. I can't stress it enough. And to be authentic. Don't come in with a clipboard of what this is what they say culturally responsiveness looks like. So I'm going to check off all the boxes and I'm done. No, understand it, embrace it, let it become embedded into your practice and how you interact and engage with families and caregivers. Because we even had a grandparent pool. We had grandparents who were saying, don't forget about us because I take care of this little one from these hours to this time. So we created another space for that to really engage all who are serving in the role of parent and caregiver.
That's great. Charisse?
Thank you, Danielle, for that awesome story and example. I think for Ready Ready, part of our work this year has really involved shifting power dynamics and really getting folks to understand that it's not about what we want, it's about what the families need to succeed. And so most recently, we invited a couple of our family leaders or parent leaders to be involved with or to present to our systems building committee, which is a board subcommittee from the Ready Ready Board of Directors. And two of our parent leaders presented on what they appreciated about our work, but also told us what they did not like about our work. And I have to tell you, it was pretty amazing to see that shift in power from parent leaders presenting before a group of board members and telling funders who are on the Ready Ready Board of Directors what they didn't like about our approach. That's powerful. And so as a result, they shared 5 recommendations for the Ready Ready Board of Directors, including the request for Ready Ready board members to attend at least 1 family engagement meeting per year. They required or want to require the Ready Ready Board of Directors to have at least 2 parent leaders in each of our board committees. And also, they requested that the Board of Directors draft a plan for family engagement and racial diversity, and they want us to share that plan with our network of family leaders. So, you know, it was interesting to see the responses from the Board of Directors, and they were so receptive to that, and they recognized and they owned that the work that we've done has been great, but it's not perfect, and we always have opportunities for growth. We're only as good as our last home run. And so to have our parent leaders there feeling, you know, they felt so empowered, their voice was heard, and they pretty much created a list of requirements of our staff and our board to shift that power dynamic. We now know is going to create long-term lasting results. So as I mentioned earlier, we're shifting away from those quick fixes to long-term sustainability and a parent engagement and racial equity model. And so I feel really good about the direction that we're moving in. And I would say that's just the beginning of creating a sense of empowerment for our families.